Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Becca and today I have my November wrap-up. Now it is currently November 27th, so I haven't actually finished my reading for the month, but I'm gonna go ahead and film this now when I have the chance. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the wrap-up, and I'm going to start with some stats. For the month of November, I read 10, hopefully 11 books, which will turn out to be 3,361 pages. 10 of those books were written by women, and only one of them was written by a man. I read 1 classic, 1 thriller, 3 graphic novels, 2 contemporary/literary fiction, 1 nonfiction, 2 fantasy, and 1 historical fiction. 7 of those books were adult, 3 were young adult, and 1 was a middle grade. And I'm really happy because 6 of the 11 books, 11 hopefully, books that I read in November were written by a person of color, which it's definitely been a goal that last half of this year to try to read more books written by people who don't look like me. So I'm really happy that over half of the books that I read this month were written by people of color. So those are the stats. Pretty pleased with that, actually, as November has been a very stressful month for me. I did intend to participate in NaNoWriMo this year. I only got around to 11,000 words just because I've had a lot of stressful things going on this month. Stressful adult things that finally are kind of getting figured out. So definitely proud of myself for still reading 10, hopefully 11 books. So the first book that I want to talk about, I actually read most of it in October, but I wasn't able to finish in October, and that is The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton. This was our book club pick for the month of November, so our book club meets on the first Wednesday of the month. So in the very beginning of November is when I finished this. I gave this book 3 stars. Still not sure if I liked this book or not. I liked the reading experience, and I mean, I always love, being able to check off a classic on my list. This one was interesting. So if you don't know, this book is about a man called Newland Archer who basically falls in love with a woman before he gets married to another woman, and then kind of how their story unravels. It's really about the subject of marriage and the classist society that Newland Archer lives in. I wouldn't call this a romance, even though it has been marketed to me as a romance. The characters in this were, I think, the best part of this book. They really were the part that you were reading to get more from the story. It was definitely a book on character development. There is no plot in this book. So it was really interesting. I enjoyed reading about the society of that time and what Edith Wharton was trying to say, because this is technically a satirical work, so she is pretty much making fun of them. But yeah, so that was the first book that I finished in November, and started off with a doozy, and it made me feel really accomplished. The next book that I finished in November was When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole. This is 100% my favorite thriller that I've read this year. I will say that I haven't read a lot of thrillers this year, probably like under 10. I'm really picky about them. I really loved this story though because it's not your typical thriller. So the story follows Sydney Green, who is kind of coping with her mother's illness. She's also kind of coping with her recent divorce and just like the changes that are occurring in her life and in her neighborhood. And it's a story really about the gentrification of her community, but also kind of talking about the history of gentrification and how it started in New York and how it's always been a thing, It also follows the secondary character, Theo, who is a white man who's basically helping Sydney on a project because she's trying to start a tour of the neighborhood, because there are a lot of historical tours of Brooklyn, and she wants one that is actually about the people who have lived in Brooklyn, like historically, instead of, like the white people or who are moving there now. That's the main plot of the story. And so it doesn't really sound like a thriller, but the author Alyssa Cole, she like weaves in this eerie feeling that is Sydney kind of falling off the deep end after her divorce and trying to cope with her mother's illness? Is she going crazy? Is she just being paranoid and seeing these things that aren't actually there? So you're kind of like, what's going on? You get this eerie vibe, and it's very unsettling. I will say it's a very slow read, and I think that really helps build up that eerie vibe. And then the ending is like boom, so much action in the very end, and it really keeps the reader enthralled, and mind was blown at the end of this book. I will say that it's not for everyone, but if you are very picky about thrillers like I am, this might be the thriller for you. The next book that I finished in November is Check Please Volume 1, and this is by Ngozi Ukazu. This is a graphic novel about this character whose name is Eric. I don't remember his last name, but they call him Biddy. That's like his nickname, and he's a hockey player who joins a new hockey team as he goes to college, and it's about just him learning more about himself, just developing more as a hockey player, and he likes to bake, and it's really cute. It's a really cute graphic novel, and I like that the author talks about in the very beginning how she never intended to write this book, but here it is, and it's adorable, and I highly recommend it. It's a fun, easy read, and I gave this book 4 stars. The next book that I read in November is Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. This is kind of a contemporary literary fiction, short little novel about a woman who works at a convenience store, and it's a very short book, so I'm afraid of giving something away. So it's kind of just about how our main character is constantly pressured by society and her family and friends about having like a real job or getting married or something like that, but she's pleased with her life. She likes working at the convenience store and having a simple life. The main character is definitely very quirky. I don't know if she has perhaps a mental disorder or something, but she does see the world differently than I would say the majority of people. I really enjoyed listening to this book. I listened to the audiobook, and I felt very immersed in the story while I was listening. It's very short. I think the audiobook was like 3.5 hours long. I can't really say that much about this book. I thought it was a very interesting discussion on what matters in life and what people find success in. I mean, it's also interesting because if she does have a mental disorder, which you really can't tell that from the book unless the author says so explicitly, because it's such a short book, you can't really diagnose or identify that in a short book like this. But if she does, I think it's also an interesting discussion on how people with mental disorders live in our societies and how they still feel those pressures, even if society treats them differently. So it's a very interesting read. I'm glad I read it. It's also a work in translation from the original Japanese, so it completes a challenge for me this year. And yeah, I gave it 4 stars. The next book that I read in November, or I finished in November, I had to return to my library because it was way overdue that they were charging me the lost fee for it. But that was White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. I don't want to get into this book too much. I know there's a lot of controversy about a white woman gaining so much money during like Black Lives Matter movements, and I completely understand that. I think though that it's hard to judge this book without reading it because it really is a book for white people. I mean, yes, if you're not white, you can still read it, but it is for white people to understand white fragility. It was okay. I think she's very technical, and that made it kind of hard to read at some points, but I thought it was a very good book to read and great starting point for reading more books about anti-racism. So definitely a good starting place, but definitely not where you should end. You should keep reading, and I intend to. The next book I read was American Born Chinese by Jean Lewin Yang. I gave this book 3 stars. I think it's definitely a great book about what it's like to not be someone who is white in America. It's about a boy who is the first Chinese American kid in his class, and about how he's treated differently. And then when a boy from Taiwan joins his class, how he's then treated differently because there's another not white person in his class. And so I think it was really interesting and a good book to read to gain more perspective of what it's like to not be the majority, if you will, in your class. So I think it was a very good read. I gave it 3 stars though because the way that it was told was just not for me. It's told in 3 separate kind of ways. One is very realistic. This is actually him and how he's being treated in class. And then the second one is kind of like a white person perspective who has a cousin who is Chinese, who's like the author portrays this character as like all of the Chinese stereotypes that you can think of. And then the third story is it's kind of like about a Chinese myth about the Monkey King. Yeah, so he's like the Monkey King, and it's a myth, a Chinese myth. And then the author weaves these stories together, which I didn't see coming, but I didn't end up like that it was being told that way. I just think for me in my brain, it just didn't work. I was just like, oh, okay. So definitely an interesting read, and I highly recommend it for people who just like to read graphic novels and to read different perspectives. This also is an award winner for the Michael L. Prince Award for Excellence in Young Adult Literature. So it's definitely an interesting read, and I recommend it. Just wasn't for me, the storytelling. Next book that I finished in November was Check Please Volume 2. I'm not going to get into any of the plot of this because it would spoil the first book, but again, this is by Ngozi Ukazu, again about hockey and baking, and the main character, Eric, I think his last name is Biddle, and they call him Biddy. I don't remember, but super cute. I think I liked the first one better. This one is definitely longer, and I think it detracted a little bit from the story. The next book that I finished for November was Hollowpox by Jessica Townsend, and I gave this 5 stars. I love this series, and if you've watched any of my other videos, you already know that, so I won't get into all of that. But this is the 3rd book in the Nevermore series by Jessica Townsend, about a girl who is born on Eventide, so she's a cursed child. But is she really? What is a cursed child? And so the 3rd book follows her and her friends, and the mysterious Hollowpox illness that is affecting a specific community in the city of Nevermore. This book was super long, and I wanted it to keep going. I wanted more. So definitely highly recommend the series. It's so good. It is so good. And I think everyone needs to read this. So 5 stars. Favorite from this month? I think this is tied with When No One Is Watching. Very good though. The next book that I finished in November is The Bear and the Nightingale by Catherine Arden. This was a reread for me. We read it for my personal book club, and this is one of my all-time favorite books, so I definitely was excited to reread it again. This is the 3rd time I've read it, so the 2nd time I've reread it. And I absolutely love this book. Now, this is the first book in a trilogy, and I have not read the last 2 in the series because this book has the perfect ending to me. Love it. So this is the story of Vasya, who is the youngest daughter of the village leader in Russia, I guess you would call him. Like, he's like the richest main villager. So she's the youngest daughter, and she can see like the Russian spirits. So it's based off of like Russian myths and fairy tales. It's about her as she grows up and because she can see these spirits that not everyone can see. So it's about her and the Winter King, who is also death. Fabulous book. If you're into fairy tale retellings at all, I highly recommend this book. One of my all-time favorites. The next book that I finished in November is The Jane Austen Society by Natalie Jenner. This was on the Modern Mrs. Darcy Summer Reading Guide, and I can't believe that I waited this long to read this book. Well, honestly, I was waiting for my hold to come in at the library because it was very long. Finally got it though, and oh my god, this book was so cute. If you're a fan of Jane Austen, I highly recommend this book. If you're a fan of the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society, this is a huge read-alike. It's very similar in that there's a group of people who are very passionate about Jane Austen in this book, whereas Guernsey is just like books in general, and how reading brings them together and the love of Jane Austen brings them together. And they create this Jane Austen Society where they're basically trying to come up with the funds to buy Jane Austen's house in Chawton, where they can set up a museum in her honor, which I know it is a museum in real life. I'm not entirely sure if this is based off of that story. I think it's just a fictionalized version of that. I don't know. It was super cute though. The atmosphere of this book is delightful. It's like a quiet, sleepy village in England, and the characters, they all love Jane Austen and books and reading, and it's just like, it makes my heart so happy to have read this, and the ending was absolutely adorable. It makes me want to reread the Guernsey Literary and Potato Peel Pie Society because it's one of my all-time favorite books, and I definitely liked it more than I liked this one, but I think that's just because that one is more about reading in general, and they're not trying to set up a museum in Jane Austen's memory. So it's definitely adorable. The cover is really pretty. It's just like a really cozy read for, you know, like a couple of days where you have off and you just want to be cozy. Like if we have a huge snowstorm and you can't leave your house, this would be a great book to read during that time with a nice cup of tea. And finally, the last book I hope to finish in November is A Woman Is No Man by Itaf Rum. This is my book club book for the beginning of December, so the first Wednesday in December, which is next week, and I have to finish this this weekend probably. So I really hope that I have finished this book by December. So I'm including it in this wrap up. We'll see what happens. So I am a third of the way in. This is a really captivating story. It takes the perspective of a few different women. The first one is Isra, who is the mother to Dea, who is the second woman's perspective. So Isra is from Palestine, and she marries a man who's from New York in an arranged marriage, and then moves to New York to live with him and his family. And so it's, the beginning is of her perspective, and then it's about her daughter's perspective, Dea, who is learning new things about her mom that she didn't know, just because her mother wasn't very open and she was basically depressed, is my guess. And so it's really, so far what I'm getting is a lot of discussion on marriage in another culture and the expectations of that marriage and of women, and how that changes when they come to America, and the reality that they face when they come to America. So far I'm really enjoying this. It's very captivating. I'm very curious to see where it's going. I think the writing is phenomenal. It really grabbed you in. I don't really read a lot of literary fiction, despite what you might think, but I'm really just enjoying this book. It's very compulsively readable. Every time I start reading it, I don't want to stop reading it. So I'm definitely really excited to see where this book goes, and I'm really hoping that I finish it in November. So those are all of the books that I've read, will read in November, and I'm just like, this was a really good reading month for me. Really happy. I'm really happy with these book choices. Definitely, I would say that my favorite book of the month is a tie between Hollowpox and When No One Is Watching. I really enjoyed both of them the most. That's my November wrap up. Anyway, thank you for watching my video. Please give it a thumbs up and comment down below what you read in November and your favorite book from November. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, and I will see you in a new video soon. Bye!